Hello, my name is Max, and I'm going to be talking about this topic. So, how did a population of African leopards become genetically distinct over thousands of years? And here you can see a beautiful picture of a South African Cape floristic leopard. So, the modern discovery. Scientists discovered a population of leopards, Panthera pardus, located in the Western Cape province of South Africa, that are genetically distinct from other African leopards. They did this by sequencing their whole genomes. The leopards in this region are phenotypically different from other African leopards as they are much smaller than their counterparts. Some are half the body size of a savanna dwelling leopard. This raises the question of how did this happen and why? And again, another beautiful picture of these leopards. So, we're going to talk about leopards in general and leopards across Africa specifically, but just in general first. So, leopards are among the most widespread big cats. Historically, leopard populations were connected across large parts of the African continent. There was an out of Africa event 500 to 600,000 years ago where leopards spread to the Asian continent as well. But leopards in Africa show higher heterozygosity and less population structure than those in Asia. And so that just means that there is a higher level of gene flow between these populations, and you're less able to tell the difference between populations of leopards in Africa, whereas you can tell the difference and there's less heterozygosity in those in Asia. But due to habitat fragmentation, populations in Africa have become a little less connected. Still, genetic studies show that African leopards in general have high diversity and low population differentiation because of gene flow between regions. And that's according to Pagnarova's study in 2021. So this is where the Cape leopards become a bit of a conundrum. Are they smaller because of an environmental factor like lack of nutrients, or are they smaller because they have evolved and represent a new subspecies entirely? And on the left, you can see a picture of the range of leopards across sub-Saharan Africa. So we're going to get acquainted with the environment that these Cape leopards live in. So this is a very unique environment compared to the rest of Africa. So the Cape Floristic region, which is pictured on the bottom left there, is located in southwestern South Africa, which also happens to be one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. This region is very different from African savannas, which is an example picture on the right, but you know it, you've seen the iconic pictures. And that's where other African leopard populations tend to reside. It is more rugged and mountainous, and there is smaller prey and lower prey availability than in the grasslands north in the Cape Floristic region. So as you can see, like in the left picture, there's a lot of rocks kind of like behind the cacti there, and it's going to be a lot less open plains, more rugged. There's not going to be those big herbivores like gazelle and things like that hanging out there. So this is the beginning of the separation of these populations. So how did they get down there? So it is estimated by researchers that these leopards diverged from other leopard populations in Africa 20 to 24,000 years ago. And this is according to the Tenson study in 2026. This would coincide with the last ice age, and the instability in the climate could explain why the Cape population became isolated. So you can see kind of pictures of what some of the climatic activity was in that last ice age on the right there. But researchers did not find obvious signs of genetic drift in the Cape Floristic region, where the genetically unique leopards were found. So, why is this population so different from their savanna counterparts? Scientists expected that the genetic differences in Cape leopards might be the result of random genetic drift in a small isolated population, since that's where we see genetic drift have the most intense impacts. However, the study found that Cape leopards still have substantial genetic diversity. This suggests that their genetic uniqueness is likely the result of a long history of geographic isolation and adaptation rather than random genetic changes alone, like drift or a founder effect or a bottleneck. So, evolution and isolation. Geographic isolation prevents populations from regularly interbreeding. So, over the course of generations, genetic differences accumulate. So, when the Cape Floristic leopards became geographically separated thousands of years ago, there could be genetic differences that accumulated and remained isolated within that region. There is also the environmental factor. So, as mentioned in previous slides, there's a big difference in habitat between other African leopards and the Cape leopards. Natural selection acts on traits that have advantages in the local environment. So, given the more mountainous area and less prey available, researchers believe being smaller may benefit the Cape leopards, and that has influenced evolution. And on the right, you can see a really great comparison. So, when I say smaller and like nearly half, you can see the one on the right looks like, to me, it looks like a size of an average dog. Whereas on the left, that's, what you think of when you think of a leopard. So they're significantly smaller and can be up to half as light or half as heavy. So let's get to the actual DNA and reading the evolutionary history of these leopards through DNA. In the Peknarova 2021 study, the researchers were working on sequencing the genomes of the leopard populations across the sub-Saharan part of the African continent. So it was a huge range. This study was impressive and very important for understanding the genetic history of leopards in Africa. Researchers were able to determine that many geographic barriers did not prevent the flow of genes between populations, like boreal forest was a big, their equatorial forest was a big factor that they were looking at to see if that was a barrier that prevented gene flow from happening, but it did not. And similar findings from research from the Paijmans 2021 study allowed researchers to compare leopard populations across continents, like I talked about earlier, between Asian leopards and African leopards. But these studies didn't focus specifically on the southwestern Cape region where the population is sparse, so the genetic divergence was not detected. Researchers in the Tenson study, the 2026 study, however, used whole genome sequencing to reconstruct population history. So that means that scientists examined billions of DNA base pairs, and they focused specifically on sequencing the genome of the Cape population. They also sampled savanna populations for comparison, but their focus was the Cape floristic leopards. And prior to this research, scientists were unaware of this unique population, and data on leopard evolutionary history came from examining just a few genetic markers and where they kind of expect mutations to occur. So, by utilizing the whole genome sequencing technique, this study accomplished two things. It discovered a genetically unique population, and it showed that advances in genetic technology improve our understanding of evolutionary history. And so now we want to talk about protecting this evolutionary history. There are different perspectives on what should be prioritized when it comes to conservation. So I know in earlier years, it was kind of just the number of species or the amount of species, or maybe even individuals of a species was the main focus. But we've definitely evolved our perspective on conservation, and biodiversity is a big push now. There's an increase to conserve biodiversity. So biodiversity in ecosystems, in species, and in gene pools. So in genetic diversity is also a really big uh, talking point in conservation in recent years. And there's been a proposal to consider South Africa alone the conservation unit for the entire leopard species. So instead of having conservation units spread throughout the continent of Africa, they're thinking, use South Africa as a conservation unit for leopard species. And scientists have criticized this proposal, citing the hit to genetic diversity that a lack of connected and expansive conservation units would create. And that's from Thacker 2021. This specific conservation unit being proposed may include some or all of the Cape floristic population of leopards. It looks like it includes at least some of it. But if future proposals are made where that region is excluded or it's fragmented, we could lose irreplaceable evolutionary history, and a unique genetic lineage could be at risk. And the discovery of this population is crucial because this kind of discovery can inform organizations in charge of managing conservation. It can help them better allocate their resources and make decisions that protect these leopards. They can know what regions to focus on, or how much money they'll need for protecting unique species like this or unique lineages like this. So, in conclusion, the evolution of Cape leopards is the result of many long and gradual processes that ultimately shaped the unique little leopards that we see today. And I don't mean little to diminish them, they're incredible, beautiful creatures, but they're small. And through geographic isolation and generations of adaptation, these small but mighty cats carved out their own genetic lineage within the larger leopard species. And since conservation today increasingly focuses on protecting biodiversity, recognizing this distinct population should help decision makers understand where to focus resources and how to guide future conservation efforts. And here are my references. And yeah, that is all. Thank you for your time. Gosh, how do I end this?